Right. It's been a very intense but very fruitful day. Yeah. But the culmination of this whole event is yet to come. So we're going to have a very, I'm sure, very entertaining roundtable at the end of before we actually end today's event. We have covered so many issues, and we have actually taken also various kinds of questions too. But definitely we haven't exhausted everything, and we haven't maybe even responded to the questions in a fully satisfactory manner. So we're gonna ameliorate everything right now. I think to talk about AI and neoliberalism together means we are going to we need to talk about the relationship between these two things, and I think we more or less, all five of us more or less have touched upon this, but I think what impressed me. One of the things that impressed me a lot was what Alex said at the very end. Take back our right to be. Because I always thought he was he's a Marxist, but I always thought he was a theorist. Period. But it seems that he's more than that. I think we have, especially on this island, we have taken neoliberalism as natural, pretty much natural. We never, I personally too, until maybe over 10 years, a bit over 10 years ago. But before then, since the very beginning of the talk of lifting the martial law here, I think everybody took neoliberalism as the antidote to authoritarian regimes. So if you want to have freedom, then of course neoliberalism. So we didn't say neoliberalize everything, but we liberalize everything. But that actually meant we neoliberalize everything. Yeah. And so I think this dualist thinking was a problem. Because then we conflate a lot of things. For instance, it seems to me liberals in mainland China tend to be completely neoliberal. They just completely pro-neoliberal, but and at the same time had this very, very strong hate toward traditional cultures. Even the idea of China. And it just happened that it completely coincides with many intellectuals' way of thinking here. They could make good friends, actually, or comrades. So that neoliberal kind of light tower seems to be the very destiny of the human beings. I mean, it's destiny. There's no way you can reflect on it even. Because that's built into our existence as human beings. But what we are doing today is precisely to break that spell. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be a very small step, like Professor Liu has suggested. What we can do will have some impact, but this is just a big business, just a very small step. That we are taking today. It's just the very beginning, and there's a lot to do after this. But this small step has to be taken, especially in this particular place. I don't know about Korea, but I think it's pretty neoliberalized too. Neoliberal too. In Japan, pretty too. India, yeah. You don't have to agree with me. Anyway, okay. So I'm very glad, as the organizer, I'm very glad that we've taken this step, and I'm very glad that we have invited all these very deep thinking people to be with us. So we have some questions, leftover questions from the morning, but they seem to be all for me. So we're going to take questions from the floor here. Professor Lee.
Thank you. I didn't really have the chance of listening to the other two talks in the morning, but in the afternoon, I happened to see that in in the two talks today, there is a concern about which one comes first. About does neoliberalism foster AI, or AI foster neoliberalism? I guess Professor Liu is looking at the economic theory of Hayek neoliberalism. So it's probably, I assume, it's trying to say how the neoliberalist environments cultivates this AI technology. But I also see in Alex, your talk, there is a very fascinating point about kidnapping. That is, AI, in fact, was the mother that gave birth to the modern governance, in a sense. Yeah, and then I find that very fascinating because one thing really is about neoliberalism, which is a history of neoliberalism that I don't hear it touched on this afternoon, was about the origin of the neoliberalism as a kind of dream of cybernetics, and then it was in that historical dreaming that cybernetics is able to be having a more open and allowing more freedom to the people governed, that somehow has its origin to neoliberalism itself. So I don't know if anyone would like to respond to that.
We'll take 3 questions first and respond them to all at once.
So I guess we're just back to the same old question about if we cannot escape from the system, then what do we do? Do we just subvert from within and so on and so forth? So I don't really have a question, but I was thinking of the seminar I'm teaching this semester. So last week we were reading Cyclopedia that Professor Liao actually has written really brilliantly about. And so I asked the students, do you have any suggestions or proposals? How can we subvert the system from within? And one of them actually proposed that the book is about how the author sort of proposes to see the Middle East as sort of a singular sentient being that would just trouble the whole Western system and so on. So one student suggested that maybe we can actually just buy in small amounts oil and just to sort of slowly take down the system, if not completely, but at least we can sort of contribute to at least as rebels, for example. So my question maybe would be just about how you guys think of taking some action from within the system.
Yeah, I think my question is regarding the positionality of Asia. In the morning session, while I was chairing the talk by Joff, I remember I was asking him why the specific places, cities, all happen to be cities in Asia, Korea, Japan, India, but then specifically Hyderabad. Number 4 largest city in present day India, right? So the underlying implication is that it seems to me that that we still in our mind, have this, difference between West and the East, Asia and what? And Europe and America, so on and so forth. So that has something to do with what Taida and a whole bunch of East Asian scholars of our investigation in networks like Asian Theory Network, Asian like the Roundtable or the colloquium that ALEX is going to host in January, Asian Critique, and then how ALEX you close your comments on this, briefly on this notion, that Asian technology, because everything, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Since the time of, World War II, especially in the context of the Cold War, and Jane has wisely, wrapped up that this is, we're all trying to put our fingers against the American Empire since they dropped the bomb. So it seems to me that, so is there any way we can, think of something like Asian, like even Asian technology, and then Taiwan is very much, right there, right? Because everything that we have talked about, the chip war, and Taiwan's, the TSMC is playing this, tremendously important role when it comes to if there's a theory about Asian technology. Korea likewise, okay, in terms of chip war. So, but then my question is then, is there really an Asian technology or Asian theory? When we still follow that division, don't we actually put ourselves already incorporated into the system of what we've been taught, today for the whole day, neoliberalism? If there's still a kind of, implication about the possibility of the division between Asia and the rest.
So who would like to respond to Professor Lee? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In my talk, so I put a distinction between the symbolic AI and then connectionist AI, right? So connectionist AI might be called cybernetic, but people no longer use this term. Why? Because Robert Wiener, after the atomic bomb, and then he distantiated himself from gradually, the American government. That's why he wasn't actually funded. That's why he didn't do that research longer. So, cybernetic would be called the centralized system. Centralized system. It does not aim at the freedom, but communication. Communication. It actually influenced the structuralism. And then 1960 French philosophy is mostly actually respond to this cybernetic theory, right? Even Michel Serres and then lots of even Bruno Latour is that theory is rely on this kind of cybernetic theory. So and then Jacques Lacan is in my opinion Jacques Lacan is the first the French theorist who criticized cybernetics. So and then their point is that communication is impossible. Actually the life, that means the animal and then even the whole world cannot actually live with communication, something more than that. It's like an affect or some. If you love Spinoza, if you love the Bergson song and then kind of Alain Vital, other thing the already exists before communication, and then that's why they are interested in the conditional communication. But today's connectionist, the AI is quite different problem. It's a centralized system. It's more like decentralized. Today's transformers. All right, transformer is a try to bring together a symbolic AI and the connectionist AI. But after the LeCun and then Hinton and then actually you should know that actually this AI industry was not evolved actually in gradual the necessary way. It suddenly turned into the very dominant. Think about it. 2 years ago, nobody actually talked about AI. Think about that before the pandemic, and then in those days people talk about the metaverse. But today actually metaverse totally dead. Nobody interested in metaverse. Nobody actually invests in metaverse. This is actually the meaning of the technology today in the global capitalism. That means the technology simply regarded as commodity. So new commodity came up, and then actually these people, simply changed the list of their commodity, the production. So, but the TL and then Elon Musk, they invested already, the metaverse. They invested in many kinds of this kind of some digital technology, and they simply changed the brand, from metaverse to the artificial intelligence or some ChatGPT these days. But you should know that ChatGPT, LLM, this large language model is not the central model in the AI. The computer vision is a major technology now, which actually produced today's AI system. But nowadays, because people love to use ChatGPT, even actually this ChatGPT is quite took the marginal part in the AI industry, but more people use this ChatGPT because computer vision nothing to do with us, nothing to do with actual users. It's mostly surveillance, right, and collecting data. And then actually this, the Amazon and then, this Google or some Apple, use this big data for their own purpose. But the ChatGPT, this guy LLM, this large language model open to the user, and then it seems actually this influenced our daily life. So actually quite uneven. The technological impact is quite uneven. But in my opinion, is the problem is not technology as such, but this kind of the condition, economic condition, and then as Professor Liu actually emphasized it, these big tech company, still actually keep on this kind of order and the hierarchical order, and then they actually the take the hegemony over the other, the market or some other, the country or something like that. So this is, in my opinion, the reality of today's AI industry. And then, so we should actually target, the proper point. That's what I'm thinking. And then that's why actually, today's AI, to some point, is very very harmonious with this neoliberal logic, decentralized, and then to some point is they could collect the big data, not actually the harming. That means not actually touching that kind of issue of the human rights, something like that, is very neoliberal. But well, actually, we should dig into this issue further.
All right, I'll respond to both Professor Chen and Liang, and then you. Okay. Yeah. First of all, Professor Liang's question concerning the 中体系用 thing, the maintaining the right Asian body Western instrumentality kind of thing. That's what he meant by the Chinese thinking in the early 20th century. I mean early 20th century. I think I suggest you read Yu Hui's book on cosmo techniques, where he talks extensively about how we should try to revive all different kinds of ways of all different kinds of epistemologies as well as techniques from different cultures. So I mean, it's obvious that there's so much of this traditional knowledge left in every corner of the life. For instance, in Guatemala, the local indigenous people, they have their own way of doing agriculture. I mean, I think you mentioned in your essay, that particular long essay, people like Bill Gates, they are trying to patentize every information about those seeds. Of the patented all the ways of doing farming in different corners of the world. So all this traditional knowledge has become patented by them, patented by Bill Gates. And obviously these traditional knowledge is very important, especially in terms of coping with climate change. So there's a theory for that too. Walter Mineral, the guy from Argentina, who was engaged in liberation theology. I mean, maybe not him, but his friends, who is an advocate of decolonial movement, and he talks about this exteriority of modernity. In other words, he's asking us not to be deceived by by the illusion that, if neoliberal order is the fate, is the human destiny already. I mean, there's no way out. There are a lot of ways out. When you look at the traditional cultures, you realize that, they're so different from neoliberal thinking. For instance, I just cited randomly in the Chinese Taoist text, but you go to the tribal societies in Taiwan, all of them have this more or less animistic way of life. Even though many of them have already, converted to Christianity, Protestantism or Catholicism, still, they practice in their everyday life. They still practice some kind of, or to some degree, the animist way of living. So it's not that the world has been completely colonized to a point, to the very micro kind of level. So one other thing is, in response to what you just said, I think it sounds like a very interesting idea, but I think that the best way to deal with the liberal order, dominated by this very advanced technology, is to use that technology. I think Professor Liu has kind of suggested that, and it happened already. Like Assange was able to infiltrate it into all these governments and found out all these secrets, and that's why, of course, he had to almost die. Right? Assange, you know him, right? Yeah. And also Snowden. But of course, these two were chased to the last corner of the world. And in the case of Snowden, even China did not have the guts to take him. Eventually, it was Russia. So that's why I always believe that in a world where there's only God, the God becomes devil. So you need devils in order to offset the power of God. Otherwise, God will just be. That's what what we learn as a student of English literature from Milton. Paradise Lost. And why was it lost? Because the archangel rebelled against God because of his tyranny. So I guess that's what I would like to say. And please go ahead.
I have an argument. I'm going to mention Yokri as well, because I don't think he's necessarily the person we have to turn to answer this question. And the argument is going to proceed like this. So I heard many people in the audience talk about politics, and Professor Liu expertly spelled out the kind of, and Taek-Gwang and Manoj and of course Sebastian spelled out the kind of reality of AI. And the question was, how do you respond to it politically? What do you do with it? How do you find a resistance? How do you find an alternative, and so on? And those questions are obviously arguably the most important questions. And so there's kind of spur for me to understand artificial intelligence and maybe neoliberalism and trying to find a critique of it is to turn to someone like Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the architect of the World Wide Web, who, along with the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, called for the radical reinvention of the World Wide Web. Let's put it like that. Another form of what we understand to be an everyday usage, which is the World Wide Web, should have arguably a plurality of different forms of what the World Wide Web is, not just the American version with its 95% of cables under the ocean, but Chinese web, which of course exists, and of course with a huge population, it's already there, which to my mind raises the question what we haven't really spoken about today, which is China and the neoliberal use of AI in China and the social point system that works there and uses AI to arguably map and curate and control its populace politically. So we heard a lot about America and the libertarianism of America, but we heard very little about China. And of course, there are other regimes around the world which have used AI as control mechanisms now. And of course, in times of war, you see it used all the time with the drone machines dropping bombs on Ukraine and Russia as well, at precisely the same moment as we're speaking. So to turn to this idea of like a cosmotechnics, a different, like thinking about the reformulation of the World Wide Web, maybe thinking about a different kind of cosmotechnics, not just what we understand to be the technologies of the West, no? We can think about Chinese technology and Japanese technology, or Mexican technology, Egyptian technology, and so on. So this is maybe arguably one of the arguments of Yokui, I don't know, but I don't think we need him, because if you were to spend a day walking in a museum in Korea, in Taiwan, in China, and in Mexico, or wherever you hail from, you'll find out that the technologies are already there. We can trace them. You can find out what the Egyptians were doing thousands of years ago with technologies. You can work out there are these technologies already there. Now, that is something I think we should kind of return to, this idea of the other forms of technology. It's right, and it can serve as a kind of way to maybe think what the World Wide Web is. So I guess my argument is like this, and this I'll appeal to Manoj's argument today, who talked about Turing, and it's not like an adult AI we turn to, it's a child's AI, because the child will learn as like a survival mechanism. No? So I was thinking about what Manoj said, and I kind of wanted to understand it in the sense of what I kind of read yesterday, which this is an argument I got on the aeroplane from Martin Ritter, is in the Academy of Sciences in Prague. And he had this argument about Bernard Stiegler and about, what is it? It's how to make a difference in the Anthropocene. It's just been published. And the argument was that, like, we have to, there's a quotation I kind of seized yesterday. He said we have to learn to live through technology, but without having a teacher. Learn to live through technology, but without having a teacher or a tradition to tell us what to do. He said we need an experimental kind of learning that we can create and embody knowledge. That would be like a resistance. But I was thinking about it, I don't agree with him. We do need traditions, like Chinese tradition, like traditions in the West, like traditions in Africa and so on. But it's a question about how we access them. That's the question. And what's happening now is that we are losing this historical connection with knowledge because we're getting made stupid by technology. We have information, but less and less knowledge. So the question is how to touch upon the dead forms of knowledge which we can use and revitalize and apply to our particular moment. And the problem is we struggle to somehow access them because we're becoming proletarianized in our sensibility, in our knowledge, and therefore that's the point of resistance, is when you think about that and you say, okay, this is where I begin to make a new new world view, a Chinese world view, or a Polish world view, or a German world view, or something like that, or not even a national world view, but something like an appeal to traditional forms of knowledge might be a way to kind of work on that idea of like a Turing AI which learns, which appeals to tradition, and which does have a teacher. So that was my kind of criticism of Ritter's argument yesterday. So the question is, this knowledge that I said you find in museums and so on, this is called what Stiegler calls the noetic necromas, which means to say the noesis as knowledge, and the necromas is the history of dead forms of knowledge. So we've got to work out how we can reform the World Wide Web, how we can appeal to something like a cosmotechnics, but in order to access what is called the noetic necromas, which is the history, the vast, deep history we have as human beings.
Okay, Manoj?
I would like to respond to the larger dialogue. I was just amused by, I was just wondering, I was thinking how tradition as a concept was emerging as a kind of a resistance vis-a-vis technology. Tradition as a concept. I have a problem there, actually. I think one of the most important things, she was referring to Hyderabad, one of the most important thing vis-a-vis Indian cities for studying like technology for that matter is that there is no specific difference. You can only make a difference in terms of density of population and the density of surveillance cameras right now, right? Otherwise, there is no city which makes any distinctive kind of an interference vis-a-vis technology. It doesn't offer any resistance like that. And second point is that it's also kind of, there is too much of technology has become so global so that there is no traditional way of resistance. I think there is hardly any scope like that, I feel. That's my take on that. Second thing is that I was amused by, as I said, I was amused by how tradition is emerging as a kind of a resistance vis-a-vis the globalized form of technology, which I'm critical about. Because even look at like, Indian technology, Chinese technology as a resistance, you may think I can give you a very, 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 very good example vis-a-vis the technologies of resistance via colonialism, against colonialism, British Imperium for that matter. Gandhi, his way of taking commodities, salt, other commodities as a resistance, for example, in terms of like, what do you call Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi means like kind of not taking part in buying clothes which is being exported, right? Resting onto the Indian commodities. So he used the salt satyagraha, salt as a commodity, but being used as a technology of resistance in that particular point of time. But these kind of traditional resistance, which kind of have a positive edge vis-a-vis colonialism, has a negative edge within the domestic colonialism in India. How far you kind of eulogizing tradition as such a category as offering resistance in domestic politics? What do you offer as kind of a resistance vis-a-vis colonialism might be having another edge, right? When you talk about tradition and individual talent, right, T.S. Eliot, we normally think of tradition as something to be always like, to be replaced or to be reinvented and all those things. Tradition was never considered as a kind of a concept, valued concept, at least when I was growing up, right? But right now, tradition emerges as a kind of a resistance. I think I'm doubtful about it. And I don't really buy that argument completely, because there is a possibility of some sort of another subversion within that as well. So you can't generalize in such a way that tradition can offer something in opposition to the West. I'm talking from the Indian experience. Maybe Taiwanese experience might be different. But like, from the Indian experience, I won't say that anything traditional would resist something, what you call the global technology or technology of surveillance or technology of oppression as such. And primarily, as I said, to respond to one more point, as Deleuze says, technology is primarily social. There is nothing, it's technological about it, it's more social about it. In that sense, I think if you are looking for kind of a resistance in the contemporary context, I think the resistance is from within the system. There is no resistance that you that is the whole point I was arguing in my presentation in the morning. There's no point like you can step out of technology and kind of think of like subverting it from outside. No possibility. I don't think so. It is only a subversion from within. If you think of like I was teaching existential philosophy this semester at my school, wherein which I ended up with is that a possibility of a cyborg existentialism. What it means to be an authentic individual in the age of AI. Like what could be? I mean, like I was thinking about Edward Snowden and other people. Who could be the new Che Guevara? Who is the person who can completely kind of go against the system? I think a kind of a purely non-technologized individual is an impossibility. It has to be a cyborg. Clearly, it has a ground is cyborg. There is no way you can get out of it. Yeah, thank you.
I think when I was, I don't know about Joff, when I was talking about, I was recommending the book by Yu Hui. Both me and Yu Hui, we're talking about epistemology and ontology rather than techniques. I mean, when they talk about techniques, when he's talking about attitudes toward techniques rather than techniques themselves. So, it's a mind rather than technology itself. Yeah. So, and what we need to do is when Walter Mignolo suggested that that there's actually an exteriority of modernity, he's saying that there were things that are oppressed, suppressed by modernity. So they're still there, maybe already like truncated or but they're still living forms of traditional knowledge. Yeah. So that's why I think maybe Alex, or somehow I just wrote down this when I was listening to his talk. AI, we haven't done that thoroughly, but we have to historicize AI. The rise of AI. It's a historical phenomenon, and it's probably, like you said, rooted in Western Enlightenment knowledge, and so it's not. Maybe in other cultures we could have developed it differently, or maybe in the future we can treat it differently, or develop it in different directions, using our traditional epistemology as well as ontology. So historicizing AI is very important. That or even of course the neoliberal order. Then we are able to see that this is not destiny for us. All right. You have questions too, right? Please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me so many questions. Actually, may I just, it's related to my question. I just want to respond to what Dr.
Manoj.
Okay. I wouldn't call it personally tradition. I would say it's ecologically sound principles that have allowed these societies to continue living for much, much longer than industrial societies have. So, and then I also had a question related to this professor mentioned subverting from inside the system, and then you said, you cannot subvert from outside the system. And my question actually was, maybe the only way to do anything to challenge the system is from outside of it, because it's kind of like, I was thinking about how can no one's going to try to sink a boat that we're also in. I was just talking afterwards with Professor Alex about this, right? That, okay, so how do we sink the U.S. empire? And he said most people don't want to, and then and because we might all get chaos, and so I guess I don't know. I guess my question is sort of a question I've been thinking about also, but it's as long as we are, I think, okay, from people I talk to, right, most people harbor a sense of powerlessness. If I talk to my parents, or, they're like, okay, sure, even if they agree, which they don't necessarily, but even if they're like, okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? It's too big. So that's one type of people, most people, I would say. Okay, most people in middle class societies. Okay. And then there's people like us who care, but then how much? Enough to risk what, and to change our lives in what way, and to be able to get outside the system in what way. And then I would say there are people living outside the system, like permaculture people, or people who are trying to emulate the ecological societies that existed. So there are things like low tech, like appropriate tech, there are, and I actually I'm aspiring to do that. I'm very new to all this, I'm aspiring, but given that there's also a lot of data about how industrial consumer societies are collapsing are already collapsing, and going to get worse, and lots of disasters on the horizon. isn't it also to our own benefit to try to get outside the system if we're going to do anything about it? Because we are oppressed inside the system, and so we're dependent, right? So I guess it's more like a proposition. Like, what do you think? Do we have to get outside the system?
Have you seen a movie filmed in Korea called Snowpiercer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all on this Snowpiercer, a train. There are many classes, and the technology is controls everything. But I am curious. If we leave the train, what will happen? How can we survive?
Thank you. So, as a law student, I can't help but try and translate how all of these philosophical frameworks that you present could potentially translate into the law in a practical sense. And I believe that most of you have given very in-depth propositions on how conceiving post-human subjects would respond to this neoliberal trend of exploitation of the people through either algorithmic control or through smart architectural control or through the architecture of the web itself. So the response would be to abstain from this subject that is controlled and try to find ourselves in new ways. But of course, in law, we need to think of some sort of subject, and I was trying to balance these two notions, and well, in a way, also taking comment of some of, for example, Professor Lee mentioned that the Korean Democratic Party, I know that this is somewhat of a separate notion, but also fed from the ideas of neoliberalism, just to reach the same place from a different ideology. And I am a little bit, it resonated a bit in my head with the fact that neoliberalism maybe could also work, if exploited in the wrong way, with some of these post-humanist conceptions of the subject, if they were to be once again exported, for example, from Asia to the US or Europe and be instrumentalized to fit the same initial purpose of exploitation. And most particularly, I was thinking about it in the sense of, for example, let's take a pre-existing hierarchy of exploitation, that is the exploitation of women's bodies, just as a premise. And then we take the post-humanist view on the subject of, well, we find ourselves in material things, and I believe that there was a certain concept of multiplicity involved to this post-humanist perspective of the self, right? Of, well, everything has a soul to themselves, let's say, and in a way, neoliberalism is the opposite in that it is the unity of the self in one thing that has control over the surroundings. Now, I was wondering, to what extent can we surpass this idea of individualism in the neoliberal sense if we do not depart from the notion of subjectivity? Because if we were to, for example, think of the notion of a woman as a subjective idea, or as any other collective as a subjective idea, then once that is translated into the law, then there is no material way that a court or any other institution could defend the vulnerable subjects, whether in Asia, in Europe, or in the US, from a material exploitation, which is now being aggravated by technology in ways that we have never seen before. So we have, on the one hand, for example, in Europe, we have this desperate attempt to regulate while we are barely even developing technology. So we have a lot of regulation, no technology. The US has a lot of technology, no regulation. And then we have in this strange middle point China, which has a lot of regulation, but it is simply not being followed. So I wonder if there is any way to, if neoliberalism is necessarily attached to an ideology, and would it be possible that this post-human perspective is used at the end of the day still by the Western powers, let's say, to feed neoliberalism? I'm sorry if it remained a bit ambiguous, but I'm trying to make sense of this comparison.
Yeah, I'll respond to the first two questions, but also related to previous discussion is that to resist within or from without the system. I think it doesn't have to be either or, but we do have to pay attention to the fact that ecologically our budget is very tight. So technology in general takes a lot from the nature. So I think some of us mentioned degrowth. Not long ago, Jason Hickel, one of the most famous authors talking about degrowth, his article talked about how the world can survive on 30% of what we produce now. In other words, right now in the world there are a lot of people starving or dying from disasters, but there are also the 1% who are taking everything all over the world. So if 30% of what we produce and consume can make each and every one on this planet happy, that's the way to go. And I don't think, and also for degrowthers, they also don't really object technology. It's just you have to use it. It's a tight budget. You can't imagine that we can, get out of this terrible situation really relying on technology. And I also want to talk about, because TSMC was mentioned, I think it's a myth, because TSMC, I think because Professor Liao said he's dedicated to talk about neoliberalism in the coming year or semesters and break up some taboos. I think TSMC, it's part of the neoliberal construction, because I don't remember if it's 70 or 75% foreign owned.
It's not a Taiwanese company.
Yeah, it takes a lot of water and energy from us. You remember a couple of years ago when there was a drought in Taiwan, the first thing the government did was to preserve the water for high tech and stop water using for agriculture. That's exactly the wrong thing to do if we want to have a long view of how we're supposed to survive as a society. So it's foreign owned, and it takes so much natural, takes so much from nature. And so at some point, I think we should break up this taboo and start to think about this myth. It's really a neoliberal construct. And I also want to mention that we answered Professor Lee's question about the origin of neoliberalism. I think I do believe it has to do with Keynesianism, because Keynesianism really made some people very unhappy because it was going the wrong direction from their perspective. And neoliberalism really is not a real, it's not, people say it's not new and it's not liberal. And it's not like capitalism, it's not like socialism or Marxism. It's just a PR thing. So it's a very, very successful PR thing. And so it's almost, and some also talked about, are we still in neoliberalism? Neoliberalism, it's just a PR thing, and maybe we are out of it, I'm not sure, but some of us also mentioned fascism. I think because neoliberalism has been so successful, neoliberalism is about PR, lying, coaxing, telling you things that are really just the opposite of the truth. But now we're at a point when I think fascism, there's a very, very ripe ground for fascism, because right now we're at a point they don't really need to coax us that much. Coercion is okay because the power gap is so big. So you see fascism everywhere, far right everywhere. Why waste time to lie when they don't have to? Why waste time to coax when they don't have to? So I think the combination of having to lie and just coerce you, force you, crack down. Look at the police violence in the West, in Europe, in the United States, and maybe elsewhere, in the context of Gaza, and the shrinking space for free speech. It's so obvious because they don't need to, rely on back when Hayek or Milton Friedman, they had to create stories, create theories to, bring you on board. Now people are realizing. So coercion, violence, crackdown, and using AI, that's really dystopia.
Okay, thank you.
I would just respond to the metaphor that was being posed while addressing the question of inside outside. I think that is a pathetic metaphor, like of a boat to talk about inside outside. Bourdieu talk about a map which is as big as the territory. Right? There is no difference between the map and the territory. That is a kind of principle of society of control. While it moved from disciplinary society to society of control, what we lost was the clear inside and outside. You had a school gate, you had a jail before, that is being transformed. These spaces of enclosures are now the boundaries are being taken off. It becomes a space in which there is no outside. You cannot really posit an outside. It's difficult. If you want to live under the illusion that there can be an outside, I think that's a choice. But I think that I'm not kind of being pessimist, or I'm not being that, but I think that is a kind of position that I have vis-a-vis that strength. And I would like to respond to that question as well. I don't know about the legal subject, the complication with the legal subject or multiplicity of the self, how it copes up with the legal subjectivity. But the multiplicity of the self vis-a-vis identity in terms of feminist position or something, curing the identity is very much important. It's not even a post-human self, but within that, the notion of identity is something which you said, is kind of bringing back some sort of rigidity to the subject. That has to be cured. Every identity in that self has to be cured in order to form. So that's kind of a multiplicity. I think that will be kind of a liberating experience. But I don't know how it works with the legal subject, which I have no idea about. Thank you.
All right, I think we're having a very very thorough and enlightening conversation in the last 52 minutes. We have 2 minutes left, so let me just kind of wrap up. But before I wrap up, I'd like to answer one of the questions from online. There are 3 of them, but I think that I'll just answer one by way of concluding. There's a question about whether or not it's possible to push back neoliberalism with, for instance, what I mentioned this morning, Chinese Taoism. My suggestion is still the diversality of traditional thinkings. We have to, we can't just rely on one particular. Maybe we can, but if that one is really really powerful. But I don't think that's a good way to resist this completely enveloping world order. I would go back to the inside outside thing. I think we're all Deleuzians. What Deleuze suggests about this is that the outside is the innermost inside. So the outermost outside is the innermost inside. So it's not like, like you said, you can't really distinguish between the outside and inside, but you can talk about the outside, which is actually the innermost inside. In other words, it's the most ignored part of yourself. Rather than, you go to really a distant place for something like a miracle drug. And this innermost inside is, like I said, is the suppressed, traditional knowledge. And the kind of suppressed traditional knowledge is everywhere, including Europe. And we're not talking about one suppressed tradition. We're talking about Indian traditions and Chinese traditions, even Taiwanese traditions. Because, ethnic Chinese here have very different traditions from the ethnic indigenous people here, Austro-Malaysians. So, the suppressed part, of the culture, you can find in it some kind of, resonations there, even though they're different. Yeah. And only this kind of epistemology as well as ontology can really, hammer home the point of the problem of neoliberal order. But of course, like I already mentioned maybe this morning, individual efforts, wouldn't amount to much. We always need concerted efforts. And best of all, of course, if you can be at a position where you can make decisions. Like I was, I was the director of culture of the city. So when I was there, I was able to do a lot of things according to my cultural studies agenda. Trying to actually materialize, concretize my cultural studies agenda, rather than being just a scholar. And so, if you get that opportunity, that would you better seize that opportunity before you let it slip away. But on the other hand, of course, people, when they have power, they change. So many people they're actually idealistic, but then once they get a government position, they become someone totally different. So, but anyway, I think concerted effort is very important. Thank you very much. We got together here. That means that we may be able to form some kind of collective for future purposes. Thank you very much again for coming and joining us. And I hope to see you again in our upcoming events. We'll have a series of forums on neoliberalism in the next semester. So hope to see you again here. Thank you. Not here, but All right. See you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, our speakers. I learned so much from you guys.